the system building skill related to week 9 is basically some basic GUI designing. So this lecture is just a very brief overview of usually what do you do whenever you are supposed to build some kind of UI application. And by the way, this is specific for UI window applications. Okay, this is not about for example HTML and web development. No, so we are basically talking about building UI applications which are essentially native applications for some platform. Okay, so we are now only considering that part of the development. So usually whenever you are going to pick any UI toolkit for making a UI application, the first thing that you'll build will be a main window. Okay, so a main window is, as you can understand, is a window, right? A window that opens up in some kind of desktop environment, and the main window is basically the container where all the other UI elements reside, right? And when I talk about UI elements, I'll say everything, right? It's the menu bars, the main content. If you consider the example of Microsoft Word, for example, so there is a ribbon on top which has some menu items, and then there are a number of toolbars, and then the actual area where you type your documents content, all those things, right? So that is the overall window. One window is basically going to contain all of it, and in general it is possible to create secondary windows which are basically attached, or let us say dependent on the main window. So in general these secondary windows are not really independent. If somehow you are able to close the main window, these secondary windows go away as well. The prime example of a secondary window is a dialog. So you see these dialogues whenever, for example, you're on you're working on some web form, and you try to submit the form, and a pop-up comes up which says you're supposed to fill this value like this, something like that, right? So those are the examples of some kind of secondary windows that pop up, where which are essentially associated with a primary window. And these secondary windows could be modal or non-modal. So this is a terminology that you will often often read. A modal secondary window is a window which basically blocks the view, or even if it is not blocking the view, it basically blocks the access of the primary, the main window, right? So until that secondary window is open, you cannot interact with the main window. A classic example is these alerts that come up on a browser, right? So if you show up an alert, unless you click OK on that alert and the box goes away, you cannot make any more you cannot interact anymore with the actual web page that was open. So that is the example of a modal window. A non-modal window is, as I said, it is similar to a modal window. It's just that this window is pretty much independent of the main window. Okay, so you can independently minimize it, maximize it, but of course it is still dependent on the main window. So if you close the main window, this one goes away as well, but even if it is open, you can still interact with the main window. So the actual decision on making a window, what kind of a window do you want, modal or non-modal, it depends on the use case. Usually we pick up modal windows for dialogues where we expect that the user acknowledges something, right? So the user must click on, let us say, OK or cancel or somewhere, and unless the user does that, you are not going to let the user interact with the rest of the application. So in such cases we use modal windows, and there could be other cases where for some kind of informative things, let us say a separate window which displays help items. Okay, so you can make it a non-modal secondary window, so the help remains open separately. You can still use the main window. You can minimize the help, you can maximize the help. So these are some of the common modes in which you will see the windows. Okay, these are the overall windows in which other content is placed. Now widgets are basically different types of UI elements that you add in your window. Some examples are a label. A label is just it's like drawing something on the screen. So it is just a display of some text that you want to show to the user. So you can create a label, and the text gets displayed. A button, you all know what a button is. Okay, buttons are pretty much everywhere whenever you interact with the with UI applications. Buttons are usually supposed to be clickable, and whenever you click on a button, it triggers some processing. Something has to happen. That is the overall idea. A text box, by the way, is probably the most common input element that you will find in UI applications. It's like a single line text input widget. Certain UI toolkits provide a separate text box, which is basically multiple line text box, in which you can also press enter, for example, and it is also known as text area. Then you have these scroll bars, which are there on the left, usually on the right or on the left, and then you'll also probably have a scroll bar at the bottom. So these are meant for providing you a scrollable view of a containing space, which has more content than what can be showed at at that particular point of time. So you can use scroll bars to scroll through the content. There are many other types of widgets. It depends on the kind of toolkit you are using, that some of it might be provided to you by default, some of it you may have to actually engineer yourself. But examples are drop down lists, check boxes, radio boxes. These are all different types of UI elements that you will find in different toolkits, and you can add them to your window application. And a container widget is basically a widget which is used to group other widgets. Okay, so you might have an explicit container widget, like Java has a specific container widget in swings called panel. There are multiple examples of panel like elements in different toolkits, or they could be implicit elements like a layout in Qt, where you can basically put in more elements inside. And the major reason for grouping up widgets in one container is that you want to have a different layout strategy for this particular set of widgets. So what exactly is a layout strategy? A layout strategy actually decides how widgets are shown within a container or within the main window. So when I say how widgets are shown, there are actually a number of decisions that must be made. Okay, some of these decisions include the position of different widgets in the container. Usually they are placed in a fashion that is relative to each other, but it is not necessary. You can fix them at certain positions as well. But if they are relative, you have to figure out what should be the position of which widget and where. You may also have to take up the decision of what is the minimum and maximum size of a particular widget that is going to appear on the screen, and whether whenever this container gets resized. So this happens often, right? That you have a window application, you have a main window, and it actually gets stretched, or it you try to reduce the size that it is taking. So whenever such a thing happens, whenever there is a resize event, and the container in which these widgets were lying, its size has changed. How should the UI be changed? Okay, should we reduce or expand the sizes of the widgets? Should the widgets get closer to each other or farther from each other? All these kind of decisions, right? They are made through a layout strategy. And different UI libraries and toolkits, they have different ways to define new layout strategies, as well as there are certain layout strategies that they often have predefined. Okay, the most common layout strategy that you will probably encounter at many places is known as the grid layout strategy. So the idea of a grid layout is that within a container you want to lay out all your components in grids. Okay, it could be 2 cross 3 grids, 3 cross 2 grid, 1 cross at 8 grid. Basically it's a grid, right? And the size of each grid is exactly the same. That is the point of grid layout. So you can assume that they look something like a spreadsheet kind of a thing, that the size is going to be exactly the same, all. And then everything else are basically cells of the spreadsheet. So it looks something like this, that if you want to lay out some components in a containing widget like this, and I say that this particular container has the layouting strategy of grid layout, and that to a 2 cross 2 grid. So this container can host a maximum of 4 widgets. Okay, a maximum of 4 widgets can go and sit in here, and the sizes of these widgets will be same. There will be 2 rows and 2 columns. So if we put some widgets in there, like a button or a label or even another widget, another container widget, they occupy spaces like this. And usually the amount of spacing that is there between any 2 components, either horizontally or vertically, that is configurable. Normally it defaults to 0, so these components will be they'll be touching each other, exactly touching each other. But you can define a different value for the spacing as well. So this is usually possible. So this is an example of a layouting strategy. So when I'll stretch or I shrink this particular container, the layouting strategy will make sure that all the elements are still equally are equal in size. So basically, if I reduce it down to this much space, the button will become probably, but button will take this much space, label will take this much space, text area this much, and then the container this much. So basically the relative layout of these elements, that pretty much remains the same. That is the overall idea of a grid layout. And now the other things that you need to know are UI events and event handlers. So basically one of the change that you will see that you'll have to adopt to whenever you are going to build UI applications is that you have to start writing event driven code. Okay, so in a typical UI application, you think in terms of events, that what if the user clicks on the file menu item and then clicks on exit, for example. So what should I do? Okay, there has to be something that needs to be done whenever the user clicks on exit. Similarly, what happens when the user clicks on the save icon, the icon in the toolbar that looks like a floppy or something, and you say that this is the save item, and what if the user clicks on this? What should I do? So essentially in UI, whenever you are going to build a UI application, you have to start thinking in terms of events, that the kind of events you are expecting to handle. So here, in most of the in most of the cases, most of the UI toolkits or libraries, they'll provide you the option of writing event handlers. So what does it mean? So they'll say that these are the different types of events that can happen within your application. Events could be as simple as the movement of mouse over a particular button, for example, or it could be as complex as the user trying to drag and drop something within the window application, or something from the outside. So anything, any and all these things are examples of events, UI events, and you can try to write code to handle different kinds of events. That is the overall idea. So a very common event over which we write a lot of code is the click event. So as I said, right, the buttons are supposed to be clickable, and whenever I click something, right, whenever I click on a button, some code needs to be executed. So that code goes in as the part of an event handler for the click event for that particular button. There are other examples of events as well, like typing something with your keyboard, that is also another event, or you trying to minimize the main window, that is another event. So these are all UI events, and you have to figure out that for your application what events are important, and if they are important, how are you going to handle them. So the way to do this is by providing event handlers. Now there are two special widgets that are often added. They are not necessarily a part of a window, and in fact if you do not use them, the space that they have, it is probably distributed to other elements in any case. But many UI toolkits have a special place for a menu bar and a taskbar. So a menu bar, as you can understand, looks exactly like what you have seen in many applications. So there is a menu on top of the application, with which has menu items, and these menu items could be things like file, edit, help, so on and so forth. And within each menu you can have a number of menu items, right? So within file you can have new, open, close, exit, so on and so forth. And these could be these could be nested as well. So certain items might actually be composite in nature. So you can you can, so you basically go from file to recent, and then in the recent another list comes down where the recent files that you just opened come up. So this is basically the place of menu bar. And then you also have a taskbar. So a taskbar is basically a place where some kind of icons or shortcut items can be placed, so that those things which are very commonly used by the user can be provided to you straight away. So this is a very poorly made drawing by me, but the idea is that you understand that basically this is the menu bar here, and this is the taskbar. So we are going to have a look at a cross-platform UI toolkit called Qt, and the code that is written in any. I think it also has support for other languages, but from the days that I have been using Qt, it is mostly a C++ library. So you have to write whatever code you want in C++, and there are both an open source as well as a commercial version. So we will see how to use the open source version. I'll just give you a very basic idea of how to use it. It's a very vast library, but before you do that, please create an account for yourself on their website, and please download the online installer. So there is an online installer there. If you download and run that installer, there are different installers for Mac and Windows and different operating systems. So I basically I downloaded the one for Linux. And then if you run the installer, there are some boilerplate stuff that you have to tick, accept licenses and all those things. Then during the installation, you should select custom installation, and just pick out two options. I think within the Qt 6 point something option, you will have this desktop GCC 64-bit. So please select that, and then below that tree there will be the Qt creator option. So Qt creator is a kind of, what you see is what you get editor. So you can actually drag drop UI elements and then prepare the UI very quickly. I will show you how to use the Qt creator. um, so I did face a problem. I was on my system on Ubuntu 21.04. OpenGL, it's a library, a graphics library, very common graphics library, that was not well installed, or maybe not installed, whatever it was. So I just checked up on Stack Overflow, and this was a solution that was suggested: install this particular package. I installed it, and then it started working. So it is possible that if you are working on Ubuntu 21.04, you might need to do this before using the designer. Okay, so in the next lecture, I'm just going to go straight to the Qt creator, and I'm going to show you how to use it. Okay, thank you, bye.